Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Kansas and Wichita government and public affairs. We're broadcast on Great Plains Television, that's channel 26.1, Sunday morning at 8:30, repeated again at 4:30 in the afternoon. Also at the Voice for Liberty, that's my site on the internet at wichitaliberty.org. You'll find all the old episodes of Wichita Liberty TV, show notes for the episodes, including today's episode, and of course all the other content that I and others produce on nearly a daily basis. So today, co-host Karl Peterjohn, formerly of Sedgwick County Commission, and before that, Kansas Taxpayers Network, and community influencer John Todd. We're here to talk about Century 2 because this week, on Tuesday, September 12th, there was a City Council workshop about the future of Century 2. In May, the City Council paid nearly $300,000 to a consulting group called Arup, which is a worldwide company with thousands of employees. I mean, it is a substantial company, to come up with some ideas about what we might want to do with Century 2, our Performing Arts and Convention Center. And John Todd, you were there, so we'll ask you some things about that. But I got to tell you, first of all, I've got a drinking game I invented involving the words vitality, iconic, vibrant, walkable. Whenever I hear city officials talk about things like that, I got to have a drink. And so I'm always running down to the liquor store. I mean, these words like iconic, you hear it every other sentence.
Bob, if you included the word sustainable.
Sustainable, yeah.
And it makes me want to grab my wallet.
Yeah, grab your wallet
like
there.
a taxpayer, you know, we're
yeah,
going
I need
to
to send you to the liquor store
Yeah.
for me with your wallet there. So anyway, and we also have a Facebook group I started called Century 2, Its Future. I plan to post information. And we do have to credit the city. The city right away on Tuesday posted a page on the city's website that has the two reports, well, a report and presentation from the consulting group, plus some other documents about Century 2 that John, you and I have been trying to get from the city for a month or two, and they just wouldn't give it up. But so, you know, a little belated, but good.
They deserve they deserve a lot of credit for stepping up and providing all of that.
I'm glad that they did that. So anyway, so John, you were there at that meeting Tuesday night. There were quite a few people there. What's your overall impression of everything, do you think?
Well, I sat and listened to the spokesperson for Arup, and the only way I can say it is I wasn't particularly impressed with them. I don't think they sent their A-team. The presentation he gave was way too long, I thought. Dealt with the possibility of rehabilitating Century 2 or tearing it down. The numbers were staggering, $270 million to do the tear down and rehabilitation, and
almost 500
almost
million.
500 million.
That's
So,
almost an annual city budget.
real close to it.
So the city had kind of four options, but Arup really just analyzed and looked at two, I think.
Right. And the thing that was fascinating, he built most of his case on the fact that we were facing an annual loss of 1.8 million. Somehow that's, and what's our city budget? It's over $500,000.
500 million.
500 million, right.
Actually,
So,
it's closer to 600, I believe.
so 1.8 million is not a reason to spend 270 or 470
So
$90
that
million.
1.8 million, I think, is described as the annual operating deficit. And by the way,
Right.
just to give you an idea as to what lengths these people go to, they're talking about capitalizing that. In other words, if we renovate Century 2, we could save some money, first of all, with utility costs and I think some other things like that. But they're talking about capitalizing that, which means that we would borrow money up front with the intention of paying it back over 20 some years or whatever, based on the savings we would have from energy efficiency plus some management efficiencies as well. When people hear, yes, let's capitalize these costs, I mean, does the average person know what that means? I mean, I think Karl is an economist, and John, you with your business experience do, but the average person?
Well, the challenge with capitalizing costs It goes into a whole series of how realistic are the assumptions going into that,
Exactly.
and who's going to bear the burden if the decision is wrong.
Right.
I mean, if we talk about the 3 Ps, which is, I believe, one of the major phrases, public-private partnerships, who pays and who benefits?
Mm-hmm. And oftentimes we hear, as a criticism, we hear the privatization of profit, but the socialization of costs, which means that oftentimes critics think that these deals with private partners are structured so that the city bears a lot of the risk, but doesn't really have much of an upside as far as profit goes.
And I think, to his credit, Don Leffler did an article recently on the 2002 lease of the, it was called, then they called the East Bank,
Mm-hmm.
came known as the Water Walk. We had 20 acres of assembled land, and they leased it for $1 a year for 99 years. They also heaped on $41 million worth of incentives, layered incentives.
Mm-hmm.
There's TIFs, there's star bonds, CID money, basically. And then Don's report indicates that we haven't been making any money on that at all.
Well, that's me, Mr. Leffler, with the Wichita Eagle, just for the record.
Yeah.
Right.
So not only did we not make any money, but the annual reports were not even filed, and that's the real shame of that. So keep your thought of that, John.
Okay.
We're going to take a moment off for a commercial break. We'll be back with more Wichita Liberty TV. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, co-host Karl Peterjohn, community activist and influencer John Todd, talking about Century 2. And John, you brought up this 2002 contract that the city did not even pretend it was going to enforce its potential benefit. What the Eagle missed is, and a lot of the Wichita Eagle article was full of explanations from the mayor and the manager, like, well, we have a different city manager. That 2002 now seems a long time ago. But what the Eagle missed was they did this again with the same party in 2012. And I found out in my investigation that the city did not ask for the reports based upon that, 2012. That was not a long time ago. And as a matter of fact, many of the people who were on the city council then are still on now. And as a matter of fact, one is the mayor. So the city's record in managing some of these public-private partnerships is not good. Would you agree with that, Karl?
Bob, it's absolutely imperative that the contract provisions and the agreements that are put in place be enforced. And if either party is lacking in that regard, it's really unfortunate if it occurs in the public sphere where you have public tax money at risk. And that was something, when I had the privilege of serving in public office, we tried to keep accountability. Particularly our major project at the county level, obviously, was the downtown arena, the Interest Bank Arena. It became the Interest Bank Arena. And agreements such as these TIF districts, I think a project like the East Bank that has been troubled, we've got to go through the current bankruptcy that's tied in with Gander Mountain. I think it's an imperative that the taxpayers get to see the appropriate information, because the city seems to struggle in many ways, but they're now running advertising about how the sale of the Hyatt Hotel, the proceeds are being used for street improvements.
So in my view, we sold a capital asset and we're using it just for maintenance and for operational expenses.
Systems.
Yeah.
And it's a question of trying to keep those funds separated, Bob, because if you have a capitalized asset that you start crossing the financial bridges and using it for operational, it gets responsibility and accountability becomes very difficult to track.
Yeah. Now, one of the other innovative things that Arup, the consultancy, brought up is that the city could sell vacant land around the convention center as a way to get money. Well, we've got empty land at the Water Walk, which is like within a tee shot of Century 2, right across the street from a prime hotel, a Hyatt hotel, but that land has been empty for years and years, despite the city's, John, you're correct, in all the public funds being pumped into there. There's a parking garage, there's lots of benefits there, yet the city can't get anybody to develop that land. So how is the city going to sell land around Century 2 for very much money at all?
My observation over the last several years, that's 2002 actually, we gave away prime 20 acres, water walk, $1 a year for 99 years, and heaped on lavish financing programs. 2012, we had $900,000 of the land that we extended the lease. Anytime you change a lease, you have the right to renegotiate. That could have been renegotiated. No one wanted to hear my pleas to behind the scenes with some of the city council members of renegotiating that lease and making sure that at least the public's interest was a little more on a level playing field.
So they lease a big plot of land to a developer for $1 a year for 99 years. Although I got to tell you, John, the city really was on the ball. This time they insisted on getting that $99 up front.
You know, that is good business. Absolutely, yes.
Well, I'd throw out better business is that if you have an asset that you don't need, and maybe if they wanted to see the East Bank develop, Sedgwick County, we basically had an excess piece of property, and we had a radio tower on it, and we had a cash offer for about $280,000. We weren't sure what it was worth. Majority of the commission thought it would be worthwhile to put it up for public auction, and we were pleasantly surprised to discover when we put it up for private auction that we received the top bid was over $600,000, and the county netted over $550,000.
Yeah.
And that goes to how you handle excess assets, because the city has the challenge also with the state office building that's also within a very close proximity, Bob. So there's multiple
about
pieces.
Like a 7 or 8 iron, or maybe a 4 iron for me from there. Not very far, yeah.
Well, in my case, I probably need a driver, but
But you're right, it's right almost in the shadow of Century 2. That building has been empty for a couple years or so since various state offices found it was not suitable. Now someone has purchased it, and whether they're able to do something with it or not, we just don't know. But right across the street from that is the Henry's building. All that empty retail space except for one small merchant, that's TIF beneficiary. It's got parking right on top of it, yet for 4 or 5 years the city's not been able to, actually a private developer funded by the city has not been able to make good use of that space. So,
and if the public hadn't made an issue of that, that would have gone through. Actually, it was going to sell for $100,000, and really, when you look at the contract, it was a $25,000 option. They didn't even have to close on this thing. So you give $25,000 for the right to buy the state office building sometime after 12 months for $100,000, and meanwhile you get $2.9 million incentives.
yeah.
That's as I see it. We don't have bad people on the city council, particularly as people, but when you put a group like them together, they just have a tendency to they love to play real estate developer
with other people's money.
And when they deal with the usual group that they deal with, they're just totally outmatched. There is no, and what's always been a real concern, in fact it's been a real irritation to me that like the water walk, the deal that we had there, I mean, the Ambassador Hotel was layered. It was a financial masterpiece for the private sector.
Exactly right.
And the public gets to take it in the belt.
Yeah. Well, hang on to those ideas, John. We'll be back in just a moment with more of Wichita Liberty TV. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. Bob Weeks, co-host Karl, Peterjohn, and community activist John Todd. So John, you were at the meeting Tuesday night where the consultant from ARIP made a presentation. Then the Wichita city manager got up, and I was kind of shocked or surprised at what he said. What were your impressions of that, John?
It was fascinating because he essentially got up and said, we're going to set aside tearing down Century 2. which gives me the impression that Bill Warren's advertising program and all, that there's been a tremendous amount of resistance to this idea, emails and other things, and behind the scenes.
Advertising, yeah.
Right. And so the public is not buying in on this thing, on the idea of tearing it down and building something new.
It seems like, and it's kind of people have told me it's like a generational thing, that young people, the millennials, don't hold any much attachment to the Blue Dome building, they call it now, but older folks like myself, I remember that was new, and one time I played in a concert where they had like 25 pianos there all in one room and going at once. But yeah, so the manager's idea is to renovate Century 2, get rid of some of the defects in it, like the sound leaking and so forth, but even that is very expensive, isn't it?
Right, and they talked about then building to the
south.
Building on the south, right.
But let's
the convention center. The convention center.
But let me throw in just one piece of context. The Interest Bank Arena, total price tag in terms of tax revenue paid into it was about $206 million roughly. Actual building cost itself was about $20 million less, about $185 million roughly.
Got some reserves.
So when we talk about the amount of money, perspective-wise, I want people to have that as sort of a benchmark or a ruler that they can consider when we throw out, whether it's so many hundreds of millions to remodel it or close to 500 million to build a whole new building.
The brand new library that's being built, Central Library, was it 30 or 35 million in that neighborhood, I think. So another piece of context. But John, go ahead, please.
The Arup fellow kept talking about a P3 as the financing, and he really never did delve into that. And that's the part of the whole thing that really concerns me, because essentially in the editorial column today, they talked about we're going to have public discussion on Century 2, but we're going to skip anything regarding finance. That's the P3 part of it. That's the private partnerships, the same mechanisms that we've seen that haven't worked well for the public taxpayer, Waterwalk, the Ambassador Hotel, where we've essentially taken it in the shorts on the public treasures have been raided, and people have been made wealthy with that. And I think the public's tired of that. Yeah. So they're going to have the discussion on everything except that, and who's going to wind up owning it. One thing that I think is critical in this whole thing, that whatever they decide needs to be decided by a public vote. The people need to decide.
I think so too, John, because, and that's one thing Bill Warren really feels strongly about too in his advertisements, that, in 2014, which is, boy, that's almost 3 years ago now, we had a vote regarding the establishment of a Wichita City sales tax that would have collected about $400 million over 5 years. We're talking about spending at least several $100 million here, so it's in the neighborhood of the sales tax vote. And it seems like investments this big need to be put up to a public vote, especially now we know in hindsight that since the sales tax vote failed, a big chunk of that money was going to go for a water project. But we have found now, the Director of Public Works tells us that they've rethought things and they can provide the benefit the sales tax was supposed to bring for at least $100 million less.
That's fascinating, and it really gives you some idea of how the shotgun approach and the lack of really understanding. Yeah. And we mean well, but they haven't had the experience. One of the things that Bill Warren has talked about, suggesting that there be a group of people, experienced real estate developers, who have no skin in the game or nothing to make money on downtown, to retired people like Colby Sandlin, to come in and let's start letting experienced eyes look at these deals, these transactions, and look at it from the standpoint, is there a balance between the public and the private developer? Yeah. And I think that's going to be real interesting to find, because everything I've seen so far has been so skewed the other way that we have prime property, path of progress, land on that river down there, and we have failed to capitalize on what should be coming into the public treasury.
And we do have a lot of real estate talent in this town. Colby Sandlin, as you mentioned, our friend Johnny Stevens and Steve Clark has won awards for that type of thing, not just for their work in Wichita, but around the country too. Let's take another commercial break in a moment. When we come back, let's talk a little bit about plans for Convention Center and the economics of those. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks with Karl, Peterjohn, John Todd. We're talking about Century 2, in particular the convention business. One of the things the Wichita City Manager Bob Layton said, let's keep the Blue Dome building renovated into Performing Arts Center, but let's take the Bob Brown facility, that's the square building that's connected to Century 2 to the south. Let's expand that so that we can better compete nationwide with other cities for convention trade.
And that's a relatively new building by comparison. It was built in the 1980s.
And I think that it would not be torn down, it would be expanded upon, I think is what we would do. John, you and I have become aware of, and we've made, I think you have made friends with a professor at the University of Texas in San Antonio. His name is Haywood Sanders, and he's researched convention centers and their economics for years and years, and has really found that it's really not a very good way to do economic development, which is what this convention business is all about. And the Aera company realizes this. They did not say this to Wichita, but a year ago they did a proposal for Los Angeles to revamp their convention center, and they said in that report to Los Angeles, over the last 2 decades, most large and medium-sized American cities have experienced a spur in convention center development. There is a sense in the convention business that the supply may be exceeding demand. So here we are thinking about spending a ton of money to enter in a business arena that is already saturated with supply.
It's not only saturated, but the technology, because of all the digital communication tools that are available now that weren't available even just 5 or 10 years ago. I think the convention business is heading in the same direction as the post office, and that's different communication methods, and it's going to be a challenge, I think. It bears close examination, because one of the concerns I've had about Century 2, and one of the things that we looked at for the Interest Bank Arena, was how are we maintaining our existing facilities? And that's been a concern for me about Century 2, because with the operating losses, I'd really like to see those numbers broken down in detail between the operational loss and how they're handling the whole depreciation, Bob, because that number can make a huge difference if they're deferring maintenance. And what is that 1.8 million a realistic number, or is it just it's just something that they threw against the bookkeeping wall?
I think both the city and ARIP recognize that there has been deferred maintenance quite a bit at Century 2. That's really no secret of that. Notice that one of the things the manager said is we could analyze the city's transient guest tax. Now that sounds like transients. It sounds like homeless guys in an old hotel or something. No, the transient guest tax, or the bed tax, is a tax that everybody pays on hotels in Wichita, and it's 6% of the base bill. Not only that, but 2 years ago we added a city tourism fee to that of another 2.75%. It's just what shows up on a bill. City tourism fee, 2.75%. So on a couple days worth of hotel bills, that could be $10 out of your pocket.
I find it interesting. Going back to Mr. Sanders, we're the 50th largest city in the country.
Yeah.
Somehow we're going to be able to compete with the top 15 who are destination type places to go.
Yeah. We talk about Los Angeles or Las Vegas and New Orleans right there, two of the biggest convention cities. Those are seen by most people as exotic places, right? Who doesn't want to go to Los Angeles or Las Vegas or New Orleans?
This is the irony of the whole thing, is that we are trying to compete with New York City on our guest tax, on our tax. You buy a $100 room at one of our hotels, that has the 6% gas tax, the 2.75% add-on tax, this gas tax also,
2
sales
cents
tax,
CID.
and we're almost, what, 18 to 20%?
Yeah, on a hotel room.
We're competing with New York City.
And I think we've raised our rental car fees a little bit too lately also. So, you know, the city, Jeff Longwell, our mayor, when he was on the city council, he said, this is a smart way to raise money because visitors to our town are paying them. And first of all, that's kind of false because a lot of companies, like I heard from some people at Koch Industries, that say, oh, we pay for our employees that are scattered worldwide to come to Wichita all the time. We pay that hotel tax and all those taxes on behalf of our employees. So, you know, we are a low-cost place in the country. That is a competitive advantage that I fear we're going to start to give up as we have more and more expenses and more taxes. But guys, we are out of time here today, so there's a lot more to talk about. Maybe we'll continue this on in a week or two, but there's going to be a lot of discussion in the community. The city says it's going to have outreach. Well, how did that work during the sales tax? You know, but we'll just have to see more about that. Remember,
now, Bob, when you say sales tax, you're talking about the city sales tax proposal from a couple of years ago, as opposed to earlier proposals.
Yeah, the city sales tax. So I've got the Facebook group Century 2, its future. You can keep up to date there. But anyway, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV. Thanks for watching.